Good evening. Welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk About Mental Health. I'm Nels Kloster. I'm an addiction psychiatrist in Southern Vermont.
And my name is Robert Stack. I'm a licensed alcohol and drug counselor and a licensed mental health counselor. Good evening, everyone. I want to start off by mentioning that we have a website and we have a place for people to send us questions. The website is letstalkaboutmentalhealth@gmail.com. And the other thing is a text number, and that's 802-490-3590.
And we also have a Facebook page at www.facebook.com/letstalkvt, and it is cap sensitive.
Okay,
and this evening we have a guest with us, Ryan Chafin, who's a team leader from Pathways to Housing, which is a local program with a unique and effective model. We brought him to talk about the incidents of homelessness and issues around mental health as well. Ryan, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you very much. Yes, I work for an agency called Pathways Vermont, and we have several programs here in the state of Vermont. Our largest of which is our Housing First program, in which we house chronically homeless individuals, largely with severe mental health issues. A lot of individuals that are sort of cross-addicted with different various drugs, alcohol, substance abuses, as well as mental health issues. We provide them with housing first, which is the model that we serve to the folks that we are able to work with. And in that model, it is an evidence-based approach, which is a little bit different than a strengths-based approach. That is something that is very common in social services these days. The evidence-based approach is relatively simple to understand. We essentially went around and asked a whole bunch of people that were homeless what they needed in order to be able to be part of civilization, to be able to be part of community. And the thing that people needed most and the thing that people needed first was housing. That's what people said, so that's what we believed, and that's what we do. We offer people a place to stay, somewhere safe and stable, and most people are in their own apartments. And we have a service team that works with a very self-directed approach, that works with all the individuals that we serve in accomplishing the goals that they want to accomplish as people, and how to integrate into community in a safe and sustainable way. It has been largely successful over the short time that we've been up here in Vermont. The agency Pathways has been here in Vermont for about 5 years. We are working on our 5th year, and we currently house around 220 people throughout the state. Started up in Burlington. We've been here in Brattleboro for about 2 years. We're having our 2-year anniversary party later on this week.
Great. Yeah. Now, I read an article a couple of years ago, and it was in the New Yorker by Malcolm Gladwell. It's called $1 Million Murray, and it followed this one guy named Murray, and alcoholic, homeless, other mental illnesses as well. And they kind of outlined kind of a day or a year for him with intoxication, police services, medical services in the emergency room, for example. And then hence the title of this article, $1 Million Murray. It was very expensive to help. This guy cost a lot, basically, in his encounters throughout the course of any year. And they sort of turn the idea on its head. I mean, usually, right, people have sort of earned their way into housing when they suffer these problems. And they said, no, we can't work on any of these problems as long as this guy doesn't have housing.
Yeah, the traditional model to solving the problem of homelessness has been exactly that. It's sort of like a tier-based program. Once you're living in a shelter, a transitional program, and sober, and taking medications as prescribed, then you would move into the next tier, which would allow a little bit more freedom and a little bit more independence. If you maintain, your sobriety or your regular medication maintenance, then you would be there for a period of time and move into a different transitional housing program. And from there, you would have to continue to meet everyone's expectations and requirements. And if you were to fail for a period of time, to relapse in some sort of way, you would go back and start over again. And try to work your way through the different tiers to get up to the situation where you may one day qualify to have your own place to live. That model has been proven to be extremely unsuccessful in actually solving that problem of homelessness. The fact that somebody who's been homeless for the last 15 years can't maintain in a way that is expected is not a surprise.
Yeah, it was recently just an article in the New Yorker talking about the New York system, and it just seems so difficult for these folks to sort of get themselves together and their families. Now, before the show, you were talking a little bit about how this is a little different. This is a Vermont approach. This is taking into consideration the rural part. Would you speak to that?
Yeah, in the program model that we work out of, called Housing First, was developed in New York City in the mid-1990s by a man named Samson Barris. And we've adopted that model that has been very successful in urban environments where there are lots of different apartments available, where there are lots of different opportunities available. There's lots more community resources. There's lots of different places for people to go to receive services. In a rural environment, which most of the state of Vermont is, the number of available apartments, the number of available services, the number of available agencies that will work with folks who are experiencing mental health issues, homelessness issues, the number of places that population has to go is very limited. So working here in Vermont, establishing relationships with landlords, establishing relationships with other community agencies has been something that has been much more challenging than it would be in, say, New York City or Philadelphia or Washington, D.C., where the Housing First programs have been very successful.
There was a thing I saw on the TV, and it was talking about the deinstitutionalization of the mentally ill, getting them out of those big buildings and getting them out of it. And the person they were interviewing, he said, well, the problem with that, he says, it's a great idea, get them, but there was no place for them to go. And many of them have now, are in jail, are in corrections. And so you really, in some ways, have moved them from one institution that maybe had been provided some housing and care to nothing, and then now they're back in the institution, but that institution is not the right one for them. And I think in some ways your program sort of steps into that gap, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. We step, not only do we step into that gap to help alleviate the stress that's been on what used to be the state hospital that is no longer active, and being able to provide that, where does somebody go? If you would essentially open all the doors and let everybody out, it doesn't mean that everybody's okay. If there's not a place to be safe, there's not a place to call home, there's not a lot of options left for somebody. And being homeless often leads to trouble.
Right.
Whether it's a mental institution or a corrections institution, it's common.
Right. And one of the things that I know that we sometimes struggle with is, alcoholism and drug addiction. And you can sort of say, well, they need to get sober, they need to get clean before they can get housing. And yes, there's some truth to that. I mean, when you're having resources. But on the other hand, I've heard of some people working with people who are still actively drinking and saying, listen, let us get them into housing, let us get them safe, let them get someplace, and then we can work with them. Then we can begin to do some of these other changes. Have you found some of that to be true with any of your clients? Or?
Yes, not only have I found that to be true with folks that we are currently working with, but also in general. It's very difficult to try to get your life organized and put together if you have no place to stay. If you're constantly worried about where you're going to eat next, if you're constantly worried about where you're going to sleep next, if you're constantly worried about if you're going to get arrested for this or arrested for that, or if you're going to get kicked out of the tent that you're living in under the bridge, if it's going to rain, how cold it's going to be, are your shoes wet? If you're worried about those sorts of basic life needs, those sort of basic attributes of life, then it's very difficult to focus on some of the more internal issues, like why are you drinking so much? You know, what is it going on in your life that you're trying to avoid? What are the things in your life that you want to get out of your life? What are the things that you want in your life? And how do you become the person that you really want to be? It's almost impossible to even address those questions when you have nowhere to live.
I think that when I first heard about this, it was sort of an aha moment, the idea of housing first, because you just get kind of locked in the way this has always been, if they can always sort of earn this, right to housing. And it was such, like I said, an aha moment that, well, you know what? You're really setting a bar that nobody can meet when they're homeless, that they will stop their drug use, they will keep regular appointments with a counselor or with a psychiatrist, they'll be able to get a job. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. Has anybody ever lived in a tent and tried to do any of these things? Right. So just the idea of letting go of some of those, old, dare say maybe puritanical sort of notions, really opens up a whole world of possibilities. But too, it allows us to meet people where they are and to try to then align with helping them get reestablished.
Yeah, exactly. And that is what our service team attempts to do on a daily basis with the people that we're able to serve, is meeting them where they are. Whether they're in a house, in an apartment for the first time in 15 years, or whether they've been in various apartments that haven't worked out for one reason or another and they're in their fourth apartment, we're still working with folks where they are to try to address whatever it is that's going on in their life right now so that they can become the person that they want to be, and also to integrate into community in an effective and safe way. Where someone's going to appointments as scheduled and able to keep a calendar and a day planner, which are things that are almost impossible to do otherwise.
Now, here in Brattleboro, we have a wonderful outfit, Morningside Shelter, and they do a great job. They really do. And,
Absolutely.
And when, about 4 buildings up the road here, we have an overflow shelter. We have people in there. But one of the things that's really why we're talking about it on this show is that one of the things is around the mental health. And people who suffer with mental health issues, it's like one more thing almost that puts it in between that makes it so difficult for them to pull this off. I mean, you can always read these stories about like, well, I had a home, I had this, I had a job, and then this happened, I lost my home, and I have to get back on my feet. Some of my experiences working there, both in the hospital, but also working with some folks, you get a sense that it's really a very difficult thing to pull it all together, to get all the things. If you ever thought about moving in, first month, second month, security, get this turned on, get the heat, get all that stuff put together. I mean, even if you're good at this stuff, it's a pain in the neck. It's really difficult. And I think that's one of the really virtues, I think, of your program is that, it helps almost the most, I don't know, the most needy, but the most person who could use the help the most in some ways. And I mean, I think that's just great. But can you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and at Pathways, we actually believe that housing is a human right. It is something that everybody deserves to have access to, just like affordable housing, affordable health care, and being able to provide someone with housing first, to take that burden away, to help someone with a security deposit, to work out a deal with the landlord to take care of that sort of stuff, to get someone into an apartment with no strings being having to be pulled, the puppet show that you need to be able to put on by getting your security deposit and your electricity turned on and all these sorts of things that you and I would have to do in order to move into an apartment is something that the folks that we serve don't have to worry about right away. We set them up with their apartment. We help them we provide them with everything you would need for an apartment. Bed, furniture, food, and we will set you up. Like the first day that you walk into your apartment, your brand new apartment, maybe your first apartment ever, it is furnished by stuff that you've picked out. It is yours. It is your place, and we'll worry about all that other stuff
And
later.
have you found landlords in this town open to this and helpful and working with you on that? And
Yeah, absolutely. Our program will we'll do things like cover the rent, guarantee that like this is going to happen. We also have a service team of folks that work with the individuals, on a daily or weekly basis, and it takes a lot of the burden off of landlords. They don't have to actually be that worried because there's extra eyes and ears on their property, and there is funding available to, essentially guarantee that like this tenant's not going to stiff you on the rent. Whereas a lot of people, if they mismanage their money for a month and they are not able to come up with their rent, they will get evicted. In our program, there's been quite a few people that have mismanaged their money for a month, and we've been able to work with them to repay that month, to rebuild themselves financially so that they can stand on their own 2 feet. One of the issues with a lot of people that have significant mental health issues as well as homelessness is that it's not necessarily about helping someone get back on their feet, because a lot of times nobody's, like a lot of the people that we get to work with have just never been on their feet. Right. And so we get to walk with them through life and to experience life's ups and downs. We don't necessarily keep people from regular life consequences. If you don't pay your bills don't get paid. And, your electricity will get turned off. Your phone will get turned off. You will lose your apartment. And we will continue to work with someone throughout the entire process. And being able to establish like who somebody wants to be and how to live and function as part of a community.
Yeah, no. I think a lot of people, myself included for a long time, don't really appreciate just how savage the environment is when you're homeless and what it means to survive in that sort of environment. And sort of along the ideas of sort of being our brother's keeper, as we had sort of framed it earlier, and doing the right thing. But I'm wondering, sort of, to help people sort of understand kind of the idea of developing some empathy, is there is there some way to describe this sort of the path or the experiences that lead people to homelessness that we wind up working with?
A lot of the individuals that we're able to serve at Pathways have come through us through the mental health programs, the mental health system. And that system in and of itself can be relatively brutal. People being treated like a diagnosis, being labeled, having folks like us that know more about someone than they know about themselves. And that sort of disempowerment that comes with that sort of...
Very paternalistic system. We know what's best for you, right?
That's what it feels like a lot of the times to be on the other side. And when somebody has regularly been telling you what's wrong with you and like what you need to do in order to function as a regular individual, like this whole sense of like being normal. A lot of folks that I know, and myself included, I'm not real sure if I've ever seen normal. But that being said, the systems that people have been in have largely been taking care of them. The hospitals, the corrections system has largely been paternal, sort of parenting to folks. And not only is that extremely expensive, but it is also not very empowering.
Right.
A self-directed life is something that we try to help people into and support them through. And being homeless, it's almost impossible to have a self-directed life. You're at the mercy of so many other things, not only the weather that we've experienced recently, but also other individuals, other housing programs. If the government is not supplying housing vouchers, Section 8 has been on hold for quite a while. Nobody's been getting new vouchers. The Shelter Plus Care vouchers that we're able to provide people with, people have not been getting very many of those here in the state for the last several months. And, to be at the mercy of the system is not very empowering.
Right. I think the whole funding thing is very, and people are going to get tired of hearing about this, but boy, when you put somebody in an institution, it costs a lot of money. By the time they end up in the mental hospital, by the time they end up in a prison or jail, it costs an awful lot of money. But on the other hand, you have people, you just see them sometimes in a shelter. You have to get out of the overflow. You have to be out, and they're out in the town, and they're going here and there. And then the cold weather, sometimes it looks like they disappear. And I mean that in the mean, not in a mean way, but almost like you can't see them anymore. But you do see them, and you know they have their belongings with them, and they're on the road, and we all see them and stuff. And I just can't help thinking, and that's why I was so pleased that you're here today talking about your program. But I wonder if you could say just a little bit more about the whole, the funding, the vouchers, how that works. Where you are in the program right now. I know that you're not comfortable with that, but I wonder if you could just say a little bit more about it.
Yes. The way that our program has been funded has been largely through grants that we've gotten from the federal government, from the state of Vermont, as well as most of the vouchers that people have been able to get. Sorry, they're actually not vouchers, they're housing subsidies. And most of the subsidies that people have been able to get are through the Shelter Plus Care program and through the Department of Mental Health. The average apartment that someone is living in is around, let's say, $700 a month. An individual at the retreat is, the state of Vermont is spending about $1,200 a day on them to be there. So after just a few days in the retreat, you've almost paid for an entire year of living in an apartment.
And the estimate for corrections is about $50,000 a year per inmate, right?
Yep, and we also have some housing subsidies through the Department of Corrections that we currently have people living in their own apartments instead of taking up a space in a jail where it is much more expensive to live. And we have a service team that works with folks, you know, to help with issues of recidivism, as well as, you know, why you ended up in the hospital. You know, what happened, like, what were the things that led you to need to go to the retreat or to go to a different hospital. And, you know, that's where we are. We meet people where they are and in turn essentially saved the state of Vermont quite a bit of money in the fact that we are working with people in the community instead of in the hospital.
Right. I mean, it's sort of like sometimes people get this idea that, well, it has to do with their morals or it has to do with their character. Not at all. I mean, and one of the things that I've shared with you before, one of the surveys said that recidivism is based on two things, housing and employment.
And at a rate of 40%. As well, right?
So it's sort of like, you know, it isn't just like, gee, it's really nice of you to do this. This is a good idea. This is something that's really valuable.
It's a good idea.
For all of us, is to figure out ways, and we talked about this last week in our show. We were saying, you know, maybe this is the time to take another look at how we provide mental health services and use the resources that we have. How are we using them? And is it wiser to do it in a different way that really, in the long haul, actually has better results? And I, you know, your program, I mean, I think is really one of them, quite frankly.
I do too.
Could you mind saying, and I know I asked you just because I'm a veteran and I have some interest in this, and that is that, you know, a lot of times with veterans, if you run into a homeless veteran, they have services and everything, but the thing that seems to strike me is that they have drug addiction and they also will have mental illness, and they end up homeless. Now, you know, I'm not saying that vets should go to the head of the line, but I do feel in some ways, you know, is there a way to help them to make sure that doesn't happen to people who have actually, you know, served their country?
Yeah, I think that the federal government has been wrestling with that question for a while, especially recently. And the state of Vermont, including the Department of Veterans Affairs, actually does have a housing subsidy program. They've actually are going to be working with Pathways in providing housing subsidies to quite a few veterans, actually starting in the Rutland area very soon. That is going to be, those subsidies are going to be available just for veterans. And I think that's great. I mean, it's it's sort of long overdue.
Right. And you also do work with families, right? I mean, it's not just single individuals, but also families?
Yes, we work with individuals and families, anybody who we're able to work with, essentially. We've not said no very often to somebody that we can't, that we haven't come across very many people that we can't serve. One of the aspects of our program, one of the aspects of our agency is acceptance. And we not only do we try to meet folks where they are, but we also accept who they are and work with people no matter what the issues may be. In doing so, we also, Pathways has also got a warm line that is currently only 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., but it is a 7-day service where you can call and talk to a peer and avoid calling the crisis line. We have an on-call service for all the folks that we serve in our housing, all the folks that are tenants in housing that we work with, and they can call us 24 hours a day, and again, like not have to call crisis hotlines unless there is really a crisis. There are, and those are just a couple of the other ways that our agency is working to help alleviate some of the stress, and not only financial stress, but material stress and man hours, and the peer support that we are able to offer not only individuals but families is something that's been very effective.
And I think, Tim, as we looking at a big picture, I'm struck by here sort of one way to be progressive about this, or to be a progressive state, to sort of put a political plug in here with the legislature now opening up, is that it's very expensive to use this sort of institutional sort of approach. Things reach a crisis, hospitals, jails, what have you. This is sort of more bang for the buck, money better spent by sort of daily touches, daily contacts, smaller amounts of resources and time that happen on a persistent and consistent basis, whether it's with the idea of a methadone clinic versus the cost of hospitalization or residential or crime and everything associated with addiction, or whether it's a housing program like the Pathways, where rather than all the sort of medical and psychiatric and social services that are brought to bear when someone is homeless, that this is a much better way to, one, help promote health, as well as being very cost effective across a number of different spheres.
Yeah, it is a large financial burden to deal with a crisis, and doing these sort of touches every day, like you said, with with our approach to housing and with our approach to service, it is extremely financial boost. To do things a little bit at a time, and then a whole bunch once in a while, in the terms of like incarcerations and hospitalizations and crisis situations. Our program is currently very new, and we actually would love if you support our program and believe in the services that we offer to contact even the local legislation, the senators, the state representatives. It's all available online. To contact your local representatives to say that, hey, you support this type of program and this type of approach that's saving the state of Vermont money and providing a service to individuals that deserve it.
Could you repeat how they can contact you? Would you mind doing that?
Yes, they can contact me at www.pathwaysvermont.org or through our 24-hour service number, which is 888-492-8128. And my extension is actually 121, if you would dial that number, and I would return your call. It would be great.
Thank you very much. It's been great having you. And I know there was some reluctance. You don't want to call attention to yourself, but really, thank you so much for what you do.
Thank you.
Yeah,
it's a pleasure. I love the agency that we have.
Good.
Great.
Here in town.
Thank you, Ryan.
Beautiful.
And thank you, folks, for watching. Good night. Thank you very much.
Ready? 1, 2, 3.